That rusted junk car isn't worth 300 bucks, the CEO said with a laugh. 5 minutes later, nobody would be laughing. The autumn sun hung low over Sterling Valley Raceway, casting long golden reflections across rows of polished vehicles worth more than most American homes. Luxury sports cars gleamed beneath spotless display tents. Electric prototypes sat on rotating platforms while investors, engineers, and reporters drifted through the exhibition grounds carrying coffee cups and expensive opinions. It was the kind of event where appearances mattered almost as much as innovation. And that was exactly why Ethan Walker's car looked so out of place. The faded blue sedan rattled softly as it rolled into the parking area. Its paint was peeling. One headlight sat slightly crooked. A patch of primer covered part of the driver's side door. The vehicle looked like it had survived 3 different decades without ever being properly introduced to a car wash. Several guests glanced over and smirked. A few quietly pulled out their phones. Ethan ignored them all. He stepped out wearing worn jeans and a clean but inexpensive button-down shirt. At 39 years old, he carried himself with a calm steadiness that came from years of surviving disappointment without letting it harden his heart. He walked around the passenger side and opened the door. "Ready, kiddo?" he asked. A bright smile appeared immediately. 12-year-old Lily Walker climbed out, holding a notebook tightly against her chest. "Dad, this is going to be amazing," she whispered. Ethan smiled. "Let's hope so." Lily looked at the old sedan with obvious pride. Most people saw a junk car. She saw countless evenings spent in their garage. She saw scraped knuckles, late-night pizza dinners, and the promise her father never stopped working toward. To her, the car was beautiful. They had barely taken 10 steps when a small crowd near the main pavilion began laughing. The sound carried across the pavement. Standing at the center of the group was Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics. At 36, she had built one of the fastest-growing automotive companies in America. She was brilliant, confident, and accustomed to being the smartest person in every room she entered. Her tailored charcoal suit matched the polished image she projected to the world. One of her executives pointed toward Ethan's car. "That thing actually made it here," he joked. More laughter followed. Victoria glanced toward the sedan. Her eyes traveled slowly across the faded paint and rusted trim. Then she smiled. $300? She asked. "Maybe on a good day." The group chuckled again. Ethan heard every word. Lily heard them too. For a brief moment her shoulders sank. Ethan simply rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said quietly. "People only see what they expect to see." Across the lot, Victoria continued examining the vehicle from a distance. Something about it seemed strange. Not the exterior. That part looked exactly as ridiculous as everyone assumed. But for just an instant, she noticed a detail near the front grille that didn't belong on a car like that. Her smile faded slightly. Then it returned. She dismissed the thought immediately. After all, what secrets could possibly be hiding inside a $300 junk car? Ethan and Lily continued toward the exhibition hall while conversations swirled around them like a cold wind. The laughter had faded, but the memory of it lingered. Lily held her notebook a little tighter against her chest. Ethan noticed immediately. He always did. Ever since her mother passed away 6 years earlier, he had learned to hear emotions even when no words were spoken. "You know what your mom used to tell me?" he asked quietly. Lily glanced up. "What?" Ethan smiled. "She said that most people make decisions with their eyes before they ever use their brains." A small smile returned to Lily's face. "That sounds like Mom." "It does." The exhibition center buzzed with energy. Giant screens displayed futuristic vehicles. Investors moved from booth to booth discussing market trends and breakthrough technologies. Every display seemed designed to impress. Chrome sparkled beneath bright lights. Perfectly polished concept cars rotated on elevated platforms. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked important. Ethan and Lily probably looked invisible. And Ethan preferred it that way. They found a quiet corner near the registration area. Lily opened her notebook and flipped through dozens of pages filled with sketches. Some showed engines. Others showed dashboard designs and aerodynamic concepts. Every page carried traces of her father's influence. "Do you think anybody will actually look at it?" she asked. Ethan studied her drawings carefully. "The right person will." She nodded. She trusted him. Not because life had always worked out. It had not. There had been years when paying rent felt impossible. Years when Christmas gifts came from thrift stores. Years when Ethan worked 12-hour shifts at a repair shop before spending half the night in their garage. But somehow he always kept his promises. That mattered more than money. Across the building, Victoria Sterling entered a private investor lounge. Several executives followed behind her carrying tablets and presentation materials. Yet her attention drifted back toward the parking lot. The old sedan remained parked exactly where Ethan had left it. She frowned slightly. "Something wrong?" asked Daniel Mercer, her chief engineering officer. Victoria shook her head. "Probably nothing." Daniel glanced through the glass windows. "The blue sedan?" She looked surprised. "You noticed it too?" "I noticed a few things." Victoria folded her arms. "Such as?" Daniel hesitated. He had spent 30 years studying engines. Details tended to stand out to him. The suspension sits lower than it should. "So, the weight distribution looks unusual." Victoria laughed softly. "Daniel, you are analyzing a car that belongs in a scrapyard." "Maybe." Daniel continued watching. "Or maybe I am not." Before Victoria could respond, another executive interrupted them with questions about a pending acquisition. The conversation moved on, but Daniel remained distracted. Something about that vehicle bothered him. Not in a bad way. In the way a puzzle bothers someone who cannot stop thinking about it. Back near the registration desk, Ethan received his participant badge. The volunteer scanned his information and paused. "You built the prototype yourself?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Mostly. That is impressive." He smiled politely. "Thank you." As they walked away, Lily looked up at him. "Are you nervous?" Ethan considered the question. The answer surprised even him. "Not really." "Why not?" He glanced toward the exhibition floor where hundreds of people were competing for attention. Then he looked back at his daughter. "Because whether they believe in it or not does not change what it is." For a moment, Lily stared at him. Then she smiled. Somewhere across the building, Daniel Mercer suddenly stood up from his chair. Through the glass wall, he had caught a glimpse of the sedan again. This time he noticed something hidden behind the front grille. His expression changed instantly. The coffee cup slipped slightly in his hand. For the first time all morning, the veteran engineer looked genuinely shaken. Daniel Mercer moved quickly through the exhibition center, weaving past displays and clusters of investors without offering a single explanation. Two younger engineers followed behind him, struggling to keep pace. "Daniel, what is going on?" one of them asked. "I am not sure yet," he replied. "That is the problem." Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the rows of vehicles parked around the raceway. Most visitors never looked twice at Ethan's sedan. Daniel stared at it like a man standing before a locked door that might contain the answer to a question he had been asking for years. He slowed as he approached the front of the vehicle. The peeling paint was exactly as unimpressive as everyone thought. The rust spots were real. The worn tires looked ordinary. Yet Daniel's eyes were fixed on a small opening behind the grille. One of the younger engineers leaned closer. "What are we looking at?" Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he crouched slightly and studied the detail from another angle. The longer he looked, the more unsettled he became. "No," he murmured. "That cannot be right." Back inside the main hall, Victoria stood on stage preparing for an investor presentation. The crowd filled dozens of seats while reporters adjusted cameras near the front row. She delivered confident answers about future technologies, battery efficiency, and market growth. The audience listened carefully. Yet even as she spoke, she noticed Daniel entering through a side door. His expression immediately caught her attention. Daniel Mercer did not look surprised easily. He certainly did not look shaken. Victoria paused between questions. "Everything all right?" she asked once the presentation ended. Daniel hesitated. "I need 5 minutes." "For what?" "To speak with the owner of that sedan." Victoria laughed softly. "You are still thinking about that?" Daniel looked directly at her. "I have been designing engines longer than some people in this room have been alive." His voice remained calm. "And I have never seen anything like what I just saw." The laughter around them faded. Victoria studied him carefully. Daniel was not a dramatic man. If anything, he tended to understate everything. That was exactly why his reaction felt so unusual. Across the exhibition floor, Ethan and Lily sat quietly near a small demonstration area. Lily sketched while Ethan reviewed paperwork for the upcoming prototype showcase. The sounds of the event blended into a steady hum around them. Announcements echoed through overhead speakers. Conversations drifted through the air. Somewhere nearby, An electric concept vehicle started silently before rolling onto a display platform. "Dad," Lily asked. "Yes. Do you ever wish things had been easier?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes. Do you wish Mom could see this?" The question lingered between them. Ethan looked down for a moment before answering. "Every day." Lily nodded. Neither of them spoke again for several seconds. The silence felt gentle rather than sad. Some memories hurt less when shared. Then a shadow appeared beside their table. Ethan looked up. Daniel Mercer stood there. Behind him were two engineers carrying tablets and expressions filled with curiosity. Daniel extended his hand. "Mr. Walker?" Ethan shook it. "That is me." Daniel glanced toward the parking lot visible through the glass wall. "I know this might sound strange," he said carefully, "but would you allow me to take a closer look at your car?" Ethan looked at Lily. Lily looked at him. Then, for the first time all day, a knowing smile appeared on Ethan's face. "I was wondering how long it would take someone to ask." Daniel Mercer studied Ethan for several seconds, as if trying to solve a mystery that had followed him across an entire career. Around them, the noise of the exhibition continued uninterrupted. Investors shook hands. Reporters moved between displays. Announcements echoed from overhead speakers. Yet for Daniel, everything else had faded into the background. "Would you mind showing me under the hood?" he asked. Ethan glanced toward the parking lot and smiled politely. "There is a scheduled demonstration later this afternoon." Daniel nodded. "I know. Then maybe we should wait." One of the younger engineers looked confused. "Wait for what?" Ethan simply returned his attention to Lily's notebook. The answer clearly was not coming. Daniel exhaled slowly. The reaction only deepened his curiosity. Most inventors at events like this could not wait to talk about themselves. Most spent hours chasing attention. Ethan seemed perfectly comfortable without it. Across the building, Victoria Sterling listened as Daniel's engineers described the conversation. Her expression shifted from amusement to irritation. "He refused." One engineer nodded. Politely. Victoria laughed. "That makes sense." "What do you mean?" "People who have something extraordinary usually show it." She picked up a tablet and reviewed presentation notes. "People who avoid showing it usually do not have it." Several executives nearby chuckled in agreement. The logic sounded reasonable. Yet Daniel remained unconvinced. "Or," he said quietly, "people who know exactly what they have do not feel the need to prove it." The room grew slightly quieter. Victoria looked at him. "You seriously believe there is something special about that car?" Daniel folded his arms. "I believe there is something unusual. Based on one glance through a grill? Based on 30 years of experience." Victoria held his gaze. Neither smiled. Finally, she shook her head. "Then let us settle it publicly." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Publicly? The prototype showcase starts in less than an hour." Her smile returned. "If our mystery mechanic wants attention, we will give him a stage." Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the afternoon sky. A cool breeze swept through the raceway parking area. Ethan stood beside the sedan, while Lily sat on the front fender sketching quietly. The vehicle looked exactly as unimpressive as before. Rust, faded paint, worn trim. Nothing about it suggested innovation. Nothing except the calm confidence of the man who built it. "Dad," Lily asked. "Yes." "Do you think they are going to make fun of it again?" Ethan leaned against the car and considered the question. "Probably. Does that bother you?" He looked toward the exhibition center where hundreds of people were preparing for the showcase. Then he looked back at his daughter. "Not really." "Why?" A gentle smile crossed his face. "Because truth does not change when people laugh at it." Lily nodded thoughtfully. She wrote the sentence into her notebook. A few minutes later, an event coordinator hurried across the parking lot. "Mr. Walker?" Ethan turned. "That is me. Ms. Sterling would like to add your vehicle to the main demonstration lineup." The coordinator hesitated. "There is going to be a large audience." Ethan looked toward the exhibition hall. Through the glass walls, he could see Victoria speaking with investors. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. Her expression carried confidence. His carried calm. The coordinator waited nervously for an answer. Ethan smiled. "That sounds fair." Unseen by almost everyone, Daniel Mercer quietly watched from a nearby window. For the first time all day, genuine concern appeared on his face. Because if he was right about what he had seen, the next hour was about to change everything. The main showcase arena filled quickly. Hundreds of attendees settled into rows of seats, while cameras rotated toward the presentation stage. Bright lights reflected across polished floors. Large screens displayed company logos and promotional videos celebrating the future of transportation. The atmosphere carried the familiar energy of ambition, competition, and expectation. Victoria Sterling stepped onto the stage first. The audience applauded immediately. She thanked investors, welcomed industry leaders, and spoke confidently about innovation. Her words were sharp, polished, and precise. Then she smiled toward the crowd. "Today we have something a little different," she announced. "An independent builder has agreed to present a personal project." A few curious murmurs spread through the room. Others already knew exactly which vehicle she meant. Several people laughed quietly. Near the back, Ethan Walker stood beside Lily while event staff guided the old sedan toward the demonstration platform. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side stood multi-million-dollar prototypes surrounded by engineers and marketing teams. On the other sat a weathered sedan with faded paint and a single father who looked more comfortable in a garage than under stage lights. "Dad," Lily whispered. "Everybody is staring." Ethan nodded. That is what people do when they do not understand something. The sedan rolled into position. More laughter followed. One investor shook his head. Another raised his phone to record. Victoria watched calmly from the side of the stage. She expected the moment to confirm what everyone already believed. Daniel Mercer stood several feet away. Unlike everyone else, he looked increasingly tense. "You still think there is something special?" one executive asked him. Daniel never took his eyes off the vehicle. "I think we are about to find out." The host stepped forward holding a microphone. "Mr. Walker, would you like to explain your project?" Ethan looked across the audience. Rows of faces stared back at him. Curious faces, skeptical faces, amused faces. He did not appear nervous. "Not yet," he said simply. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. The host blinked. "Not yet." Ethan shook his head. People spend too much time listening to explanations. He rested a hand gently on the roof of the sedan. "Sometimes it is better to look." The audience grew quieter. Victoria folded her arms. Daniel took a slow breath. Ethan walked toward the front of the vehicle. The overhead lights reflected off the worn hood. Every camera suddenly pointed in his direction. Every conversation faded. Even Lily stopped moving and watched carefully. Ethan reached for the hood latch. For a brief moment, the massive exhibition hall felt strangely still. The air conditioning hummed softly above the crowd. Somewhere in the distance, a chair creaked. Hundreds of people waited. Ethan released the latch. The metallic click echoed louder than it should have. Several engineers leaned forward. Daniel Mercer unconsciously tightened his grip on a paper cup. Victoria narrowed her eyes. Ethan placed one hand beneath the edge of the hood. Then he paused. Not dramatically, not for attention, almost as if he was giving the room one final chance to reconsider what it thought it knew. And in that suspended moment between assumption and truth, the entire arena seemed to hold its breath. The hood rose slowly. No dramatic music played. No announcement followed. Yet the moment the engine compartment came into view, something changed inside the room. At first, nobody spoke because nobody immediately understood what they were seeing. The machinery beneath the hood looked unlike anything expected inside a worn sedan. Every component appeared meticulously designed. The arrangement was clean, elegant, almost impossibly efficient. Custom housings blended into handcrafted assemblies. Cooling channels curved through the system with remarkable precision. Nothing looked accidental. Nothing looked ordinary. One engineer stood up. Then another. A third moved closer to the stage without realizing it. Daniel Mercer stared in complete silence. The paper cup slipped from his hand and rolled across the floor. The sound echoed through the arena. Victoria noticed immediately. "Daniel?" she asked. He did not answer. His eyes remained locked on the engine. The audience followed his gaze. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters adjusted lenses. A few people who had laughed earlier now looked visibly confused. Finally, one engineer whispered, "That cannot be real." Another shook his head. "If it is real, everything changes." Victoria stepped closer. Her confidence remained intact, but curiosity had replaced amusement. "What exactly are we looking at?" she asked. Daniel swallowed slowly. "A solution. To what? Problems the industry has been trying to solve for over a decade." The room grew quieter. Ethan stood calmly beside the sedan. Lily watched the crowd with wide eyes. She had seen this engine countless times in their garage. To her it was familiar. To everyone else, it appeared almost unbelievable. One reporter raised a hand. Mr. Walker, who designed this? Ethan glanced at Lily before answering. I did. Several people exchanged doubtful looks. An investor frowned. Alone? Ethan nodded. Mostly. The skepticism lasted only seconds. Daniel suddenly stepped onto the stage. He moved closer to the engine, studying details that cameras could barely capture. His breathing seemed heavier now. Not from exertion, from realization. Look here, he said to a group of engineers gathering nearby. And here, one by one, they leaned forward. Their reactions followed the same pattern. Curiosity, confusion, shock, silence. Victoria noticed it happening across every face. The same expression repeated again and again. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody was even speaking. The massive arena that had buzzed with conversation all afternoon now felt strangely still. Ethan remained exactly as he had been before. Calm, quiet, unmoved by the attention. That seemed to unsettle Victoria even more than the engine itself. Most inventors would have celebrated. Most would have demanded recognition. Ethan simply stood beside his daughter as though none of this surprised him. Finally, Victoria looked directly at him. How long have you been working on this? Ethan considered the question carefully. Then he smiled faintly. Long enough to stop caring whether anyone believed me. And for the first time that day, Victoria Sterling had no response. Ethan could feel hundreds of eyes on him, yet the attention seemed to slide past him like rain against glass. The crowd remained focused on the engine. The reporters were focused on the engine. The investors were focused on the engine. But Victoria Sterling found herself looking at the man instead. She had spent years surrounded by brilliant people. Engineers, executives, inventors, consultants. Most of them carried their achievements like trophies. Ethan carried his like a burden he had quietly accepted. Daniel Mercer finally stepped back from the vehicle. His voice was lower now, more careful. You did not answer my question earlier, he said. Ethan smiled faintly. Which one? How did you build this? The arena fell silent again. Ethan rested one hand on the edge of the open hood. For a moment, he appeared to be looking far beyond the exhibition center. Far beyond the crowd. Somewhere else entirely. One piece at a time, he said. A few people chuckled softly, expecting a joke. Ethan was not joking. Daniel understood immediately. How many years? Ethan looked toward Lily. She was standing beside the sedan, her notebook pressed gently against her chest. Almost 6. The answer seemed simple, but its weight settled over the room. 6 years. 6 years of design. 6 years of testing. 6 years of failure, adjustment, rebuilding, and persistence. Victoria slowly approached the stage. Why work in secret? She asked. Ethan met her gaze. Because I had more important things to do. The answer confused many people. It did not confuse Lily. She remembered the years clearly. The tiny garage behind their rented house. Winter nights when cold air slipped through cracks in the walls. Summer evenings when her father came home exhausted from the repair shop, but still spent hours working beneath dim lights. She remembered him helping with homework before touching a single tool. She remembered birthday cakes made from discount mixes and Christmas mornings filled with secondhand gifts wrapped with care. She remembered never once feeling unloved. An older reporter raised a hand. Were you previously employed in automotive engineering? Ethan nodded. A long time ago. For whom? Ethan hesitated. Daniel suddenly looked at him more carefully. Something was beginning to connect. A memory. A name. A face from years earlier. Walker, Daniel said quietly. Ethan Walker. Ethan looked at him. Daniel's eyes widened. You were at North Star Advanced Systems. A murmur moved through the crowd. Several veteran engineers immediately reacted. One of them stood up. Another exchanged shocked glances with a colleague. Victoria noticed every reaction. What is? North Star? She asked. Daniel stared at Ethan. 15 years ago, they recruited some of the most gifted young automotive engineers in the country. The room grew still. There was one engineer everyone talked about. Ethan lowered his eyes. Daniel. No. Daniel continued. People said he would change the industry. Victoria looked from Daniel to Ethan and back again. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. The old sedan. The extraordinary engine. The quiet confidence. The complete lack of self-promotion. Daniel's voice softened. Then one day, he disappeared. Silence settled across the arena once more. Ethan glanced at Lily. She smiled gently. the same smile her mother used to give him whenever life became difficult. And for the first time all afternoon, the crowd realized they were not looking at a lucky mechanic who built something impressive. They were looking at a man who had walked away from everything and somehow created something even greater in the shadows. Victoria Sterling had spent her entire adult life evaluating talent. She could identify confidence in seconds, ambition in minutes, and potential before most people even recognized it themselves. Yet standing a few feet away from Ethan Walker, she felt something unfamiliar. Humility. Real humility. Not the polished version executives performed during interviews. Not the carefully crafted image companies placed in advertisements. This was different. This was a man who had achieved something extraordinary and seemed completely uninterested in taking credit for it. The crowd continued buzzing around them. Reporters rushed to confirm details. Engineers whispered among themselves. Investors studied the vehicle as though it had appeared from another era. But Ethan remained focused on Lily. "You doing okay?" he asked softly. Lily smiled. "I am doing great." "Overwhelmed?" "A little." Ethan nodded. "Me too." The answer made her laugh. Nearby, Daniel Mercer continued speaking with several senior engineers. The more they examined the design, the more astonishing it became. Every calculation appeared deliberate. Every solution seemed elegant. More importantly, many of the concepts addressed limitations that major manufacturers had struggled with for years. One engineer shook his head repeatedly. "How does someone build this in a home garage?" Daniel's answer came immediately. "One late night at a time." Victoria overheard the conversation. Something tightened in her chest. She looked at Ethan again. The faded shirt, the worn boots, the calm expression. Earlier that day, she had judged him in less than 5 seconds. Now she found herself wondering how many other people she had misjudged over the years. A reporter approached Ethan. "Mr. Walker, investors are already discussing offers." Ethan smiled politely. "That is nice. Do you have a number in mind?" "No," the reporter blinked. "No, I did not build it to sell it." The answer spread through the crowd almost instantly. More whispers followed. More confusion. More curiosity. Victoria stepped closer. "You must understand what this is worth." Ethan met her eyes. "I understand what it cost." For a moment, neither looked away. Victoria suddenly realized he was not talking about money. He was talking about years. Sacrifice. Sleep. Grief. Persistence. Every difficult choice hidden behind the finished result. The realization landed harder than she expected. "Why leave North Star?" she asked quietly. The question carried none of the arrogance from earlier. Ethan glanced toward Lily. His expression softened immediately. "My wife became sick." Silence settled between them. After she passed, there were only 2 things that mattered. He looked at his daughter, raising Lily. Then he looked toward the vehicle, and keeping a promise. Victoria felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Around them, the exhibition center continued moving at full speed. Cameras flashed. Conversations overlapped. Opportunities multiplied. Yet in the middle of all that noise stood a man whose priorities had never changed. Daniel Mercer watched the exchange from across the stage. For the first time all afternoon, he noticed something else. Victoria Sterling was no longer looking at the invention. She was looking at the inventor. And the respect in her eyes was impossible to miss. The offers began arriving within minutes. Investors who had ignored Ethan earlier now stood patiently in line. Executives requested private meetings. Reporters competed for interviews. Numbers were written on business cards and slid across tables. Some were impressive. Others were staggering. Yet Ethan treated each offer exactly the same way. He listened politely, thanked the person, and moved on. The response confused almost everyone. By early evening, the exhibition hall glowed beneath warm lights while the crowd remained larger than expected. People were no longer discussing the newest corporate prototypes. They were discussing Ethan Walker. Daniel Mercer finally approached, carrying a folder filled with notes. "You realize what is happening, do not you?" he asked. Ethan smiled. "People are excited." Daniel shook his head. "This could become one of the most important engineering breakthroughs of the decade." Ethan glanced toward Lily. She was sitting nearby finishing a sketch. "Maybe." Daniel laughed softly. "You are impossible." A few minutes later, Victoria Sterling stepped forward holding a formal proposal. The conversations around them gradually faded. Even the reporters seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. Victoria stopped beside Ethan and took a slow breath. Earlier that day, she would have approached as a chief executive making an offer. Now she approached as someone trying to earn respect. I would like Sterling Dynamics to partner with you, she said. Not buy your work. Partner with you. Ethan studied the proposal without opening it. That is generous. It is practical. She smiled faintly. And honest. The crowd waited. Cameras pointed toward them. Daniel watched silently from nearby. Victoria continued. You have something extraordinary. We have resources, facilities, manufacturing capability, testing infrastructure. Together we could bring this to millions of people. Ethan looked down at the folder. Then he looked toward the sedan. The faded paint still reflected the exhibition lights. The vehicle looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Only the people looking at it had changed. Victoria waited. The room waited. Finally, Ethan handed the proposal back. I appreciate it. Her expression tightened slightly. But Ethan smiled gently. No silence. Complete silence. The kind that cannot be planned. The kind that arrives when nobody expects the answer they hear. Victoria blinked. Several reporters lowered their cameras. Daniel stared at Ethan. You are refusing? Victoria asked softly. Ethan nodded. For now. May I ask why? Ethan turned toward Lily. She stood and walked over beside him. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Because this was never about becoming rich. Nobody spoke. This started with a promise. His voice remained calm. After my wife passed away, Lily asked me if dreams disappear when people are gone. The arena seemed to grow quieter still. Ethan looked at his daughter and smiled. I told her no. I told her dreams survive when somebody keeps working on them. Lily's eyes filled with emotion. Victoria looked away briefly, overwhelmed by something she had not expected to feel. Respect. Not for the invention. Not for the achievement. For the man. Ethan glanced around the room one final time. The engine matters, he said. But keeping that promise mattered more. Nobody laughed. Nobody checked a phone. Nobody moved. For several long seconds, the entire hall stood perfectly still. And in that silence, Victoria Sterling finally understood what everyone else had missed from the very beginning. The most valuable thing Ethan Walker had built was never under the hood of the car. It was the life he had built beside his daughter. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.